A few months ago, at the start of lockdown, I was seeing a lot of posts on my Facebook feed pop up about Bill Gates, ID 2020, and mandatory vaccines. Whilst the number of posts died down a little bit over the last couple of months, there's been a recent resurgence and also several posts or videos being shared about masks as well, linking both masks and vaccines to the mark of the beast. And so this is a video I've considered making for a while and have finally decided to do. I agree that mandatory vaccination is very concerning. I'm not anti vax, but the idea of a mandatory vaccine seems to me to be overstepping the boundaries when it comes to personal individual freedom and liberty. It is unethical to force someone to undergo a medical procedure without their consent. And also, the idea of a vaccination identification restricting your movement and your freedom if you refuse to partake seems to me to be the kind of policy that a dictator would invent and implement. Um, However concerning these things might be, the most concerning thing of all is the amount of posts I'm seeing from Christians on social media calling this the mark of the beast. And some are stating this with certainty, others are a little bit more vague, saying this is what the mark of the beast could be. I have even seen lots of posts suggesting that Bill Gates himself is the Antichrist, and I've also seen posts of Christians sharing posts from people like David Icke, which is just mind blowing, really. Let me read to you from Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18. Revelation 13, 16 to 18. It says, "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666, and that simply means 666, 666. The passage shows us how all people, great or small, rich or poor, free or slave, will be forced to take the mark. So celebrities and world leaders, all the way down to the homeless and those in prison, would be required to take the mark, without which they cannot buy or sell, they can't function in society, they can't work, and ultimately they can't eat. There are two primary questions that we need to ask about this passage and about the mark of the beast. So the first question is, what is the mark? And the second question is, when will this happen? And I'm going to answer the second question first. It's clear from a plain reading of Revelation that before the mark comes out, the seven seals must happen, as well as the seven trumpets. The ministry of the two witnesses must happen, the fleeing of Israel to Petra must happen, and the setting up of the abomination of desolation in the temple must happen, all prior to the mark being forced into the world's population. So at the very earliest, the mark cannot be rolled out until just after the midpoint of the tribulation. Now, for as long as I can remember, people have been speculating about what the mark of the beast might be. They've been saying for a long time that it's going to be a microchip inserted under the skin. And to a large degree, this makes sense. A cashless society with an implanted chip acting as your credit card and identification. We have seen technology such as contactless, Apple Pay, and Bitcoin potentially paving the way. We've seen this during coronavirus outbreak, that suddenly cash handling has become problematic, that the contactless limit on cards has been increased, and there's been concern again that cash carries the virus. Things like this should not surprise us, and it is well feasible that the mark of the beast will contain some sort of cutting edge technology and be linked to a financial system, meaning people can't buy it and sell without it. But what does Scripture say that it is? Again, with the current pandemic, some are speculating that the mark of the beast might be a mandatory virus, accompanied by a certificate to say that you've had it in order to be able to leave your house. What's interesting is that no one was saying this before the coronavirus pandemic hit, and so it's a classic example of what's called newspaper hermeneutics, where we just look at what's going on in the world and try to make the Bible fit that, rather than interpreting the Bible plainly and normally, despite the world situations. You know, the idea of the mark of the beast being a vaccine overlooks several scriptural truths. So, firstly, as has been stated already, the mark is not rolled out until the middle of the tribulation at the earliest, and we are not in the tribulation. For the tribulation to begin, the church must first be raptured, the Antichrist must be raised, Israel must have signed a 7-year covenant with him, and none of these things have happened, nor have we seen, the ministry and death of the 2 witnesses, or the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, which I've already explained, have to happen in the first half of the tribulation. Secondly, the mark of the beast clearly comes from the Antichrist. It is the mark of the beast. It's not the mark of Bill Gates. Scripture clearly states that the man of sin, the little horn, the Antichrist, or whatever title is attributed to him, will come from Europe. And as far as I'm aware, Bill Gates is not European, he's American. Bill Gates is not the Antichrist. Thirdly, the text of Revelation seems to make clear that the mark of the beast is a mark. A plain reading of the text means that this is visible. Now, being visible does not rule out an implant, but I think it's very easy sometimes to get caught up in microchipping and forget that we must not interpret the text in light of modern technology, but interpret the text plainly. The Greek word that's here translated as mark is kerygma, which is used 7 times in the New Testament. I think 6 of those 7 refer specifically to the mark of the beast, and the other reference is in Acts 17:29, and is rendered in those verses as graven, in reference to the idols that they were worshipping. It's interesting that Strong's gives the meaning of this for the Greek word kerygma. It means scratch, etching, stamp, or sculpture. So, we could say that a scratch, etching, or stamp would perhaps resemble a tattoo, and that a sculpture would, resemble a graven image. It's also interesting to note that earlier on in Revelation, 2 verses before the passage that we read, verses 14 and 15 of Revelation 13, these 2 verses talk about an image of the beast that is made and then is brought to life, and it's that image that causes the world to receive the mark. And so the image of the beast is clearly related to the mark of the beast. So it's interesting that mark could be sculpture. The mark itself is more than just an ID chip. It's more than a credit card or a vaccine or a barcode or a tattoo. It may include some of those things, but ultimately it is an act of worship. It is a mandatory and compulsory act of worship. And it's like the example of the golden statue in Daniel chapter 3. And just as those who bowed down to Nebuchadnezzar's statue in Daniel 3 were using their own free will to bow down to the golden statue, those who take the mark of the beast will be doing so willingly, knowingly, and worshipfully. So just to summarise briefly, is the mark of the beast a coronavirus vaccine? I think clearly from scripture the answer is no. Thanks for listening.